Hey guys, what is up? It's Mr. Reality here with another video for you. So tonight, we're going to do something a little different. Something that I've always been fascinated by, and I guess in its own right, is downright bizarre. So let's start this off by giving you some background. Civilization has claimed to meet beings from outside our planet, dating back to ancient Egypt. In more recent times, there have been countless sightings of strange phenomena by thousands of people, but always have been conveniently covered up or had an explanation, probably by those who don't want us to know the truth. However, no matter how hard those unknown forces try to conceal things, many out there claim to encounter aliens and have told of their real-life experiences with the unknown. So tonight, I share with you some of those stories. This happened to me when I was 10 years old in Calgary, Alberta, Canada in 1970. I was walking home from school, cutting across the school sports field. Our house wasn't that far. We lived across the street from the school. There wasn't any other kids around since I had stayed late for volleyball practice, and the rest of the students had gone home 45 minutes earlier when the school let out for the day. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon. Something caught my attention from the corner of my eye, and I stopped and turned to the right to look at it. Floating directly above a house facing the schoolyard was a large UFO. I was in the middle of the football field, so this is about 60-70 yards distance from where I stood. The UFO was big and almost touching the roof of the house. It's completely centered on the house, but it is so big, it is also above the house on the left and right. The lots there are 50 feet wide, which puts the UFO at about 150 feet across and perhaps 25 to 30 feet tall. It's very bright, giving off a harsh white light which is difficult to look at since it hurt my eyes. I look away back towards my house, and I see a car and motorcycle on the side street which intersects the street with the UFO. The street is about half a block away, and I remember being surprised and confused that the drivers are not reacting to the UFO, which clearly must be visible to them and so obvious, since it's so bright, but the traffic continues as normal. At that point, I become aware that something is forcing me to turn my head back toward the UFO. I'm turning, and my field of view is changing, but I'm not the one doing it. I struggle to turn away, but I simply can't control any of my body. I remember a feeling of panic. Then the next thing I can remember, I'm walking into my house. It's about 9:30 at night and dark outside. I can't recall anything of the last 5 hours. My parents were furious with me for being so late. Apparently my parents and my two brothers have been trying to find me for hours. A voice in my head tells me to tell them that I'm not feeling well and I need to go to bed. I have no idea where the voice came from, but I do exactly as it suggests and run upstairs to my room and go to bed. The next day, I still can't explain what happened, and my mother is even more angry with me since my new shoes are ruined. The tops of them are all scuffed and dirty, like I was dragged face down across the ground with my feet still dragging on the ground. I told my older brothers what happened, and they suggested I kept quiet about it, since nobody would believe me. Good advice as it turns out, since in the many years since, most of the people I shared the story with don't really know what to say afterward. Many years later, I was looking at my old school workbooks from that time, and they are full of drawings of UFOs, all of the same design, and with more detail than I can recall from my memory. For example, in my memory, I can't remember seeing any windows in the UFO, since the light was too bright to make out any details, but in my drawings, there were large round windows all around the UFO, some with faces looking out. When I was in 6th grade, I woke up one day with 4 very small holes on my upper right thigh. It looked like the skin had been perfectly cut out in perfect tiny circles, yet there was no blood. The circles were in a straight line and across my thigh horizontally, no more than 6 inches wide completely. I also felt very tired and couldn't remember what I had dreamt, which is weird for me since I pretty much remember every dream I have every night. I put band-aids on them and went to school as usual. The next morning, I wake up and there are 3 new holes, right above the previous 4. I woke up once again very tired and drowsy, and was now weirded out by how symmetrical everything was that I showed my mum, who said it was most likely ant or spider bites. Next morning, 2 more holes above the previous 3, and the morning after that, 1. This is when I was seriously scared, since the holes now formed a triangle that pointed to my knee and they weren't scabbing over. I was so tired and confused and was scared to go back to bed, so I stayed up really late but woke up the next morning not even knowing when I had fallen asleep, only dark and then morning. When I did wake up, I was suddenly very alert, and when I threw my blanket off my legs, I found all the holes completely gone. No scabbing or scarring or any trace of the circles on my thigh. I showed my mum and she just brushed it off as they healed like any other cut. I'm honestly not sure if this is related, but I do feel like there is a correlation. After this, I couldn't really comprehend math anymore. I had excelled at math all my life, but after this incident, it was like numbers had no meaning to me and I couldn't figure out simple equations. I went to an advanced school and had been learning algebra and geometry and was doing great, but then it was like, poof, all my math knowledge and comprehension was gone. To this day, I can't even do simple addition problems without double checking them. I was camping in a campground in northern Georgia with some friends. It was starting to downpour, so everyone left their tents in the woods and decided to rent one of the on-site cabins for everyone to sleep in. I decided I'd just sleep in my car because they wanted to stay up late and I was tired from kayaking all day. I woke up to the rain stopping and it was kind of cold in the car, and I had forgotten my sleeping bag in my tent. I checked the cabin to see if there was any room left and the light was on and everyone was fast asleep at 3 AM. I didn't want to squeeze in, so I decided to trek my way to my tent in the dark with a small pen light. In order to get to my tent, I had to pass everyone's that they left. Mine was the last one, and even then was 50 feet at least from the previous tent before it. I got in my tent, covered up with my sleeping bag and prepared to catch the last few hours of sleep before sunrise. No more than 10 to 15 minutes from me getting in my tent, I began to hear light whispers right outside the tent door. They weren't in English and, to my recollection, indecipherable. Just as the voices started, 2 orbs appeared together outside the tent. They weren't the same glare as a flashlight would make, and both were 2 different colours that, to the best of my ability, had no real distinct colour, just colourful. The whispers outside the tent began arguing louder with each other, but still in a hushed tone. And as the whispers grew louder, the lights began swirling around the tent. Behind me, to the side, to the front. Not in the movement that one would make with flashlights, and at this point, I realised no footsteps could be heard. I uncovered myself and knelt on the tent floor, preparing for the zipper to come undone like a horror movie, and I was flipping through my mind on what option to take. I was the most terrified I had ever been. Fight or flight. The lights swelled faster and the voices grew louder, but still breathy and whispery. My mind raced and I was sweating despite the cold. And then, just like that, the lights shut off like a switch, and the whispers stopped. Nothing but silence of an empty woods. And I didn't dare go outside the tent till the sun came up. When I was 13, I was home alone on our farm as my mum and sisters were at some sort of high school sports thing. I had just finished chores for the night and was heading back to our house. I had to take off my mud-encrusted lace-up boots, which takes forever, and started listening to what I thought was my mum and sister talking. I remember thinking it was weird as it really didn't sound like them. It really didn't sound like talking actually. My brain knew somebody was talking in a very loud and annoyed way, but I don't remember actually physically hearing it or being able to decipher the language. I was also starting to get a bad feeling over the fact that I didn't see anybody come home while I was outside. Obviously, somebody could have pulled in just as I went back into our mudroom, but I never heard either a car door close, the front door open, or the most damning, our psycho rat terrier start to bark. I finally pried my boots off my feet and headed inside. I called out hello while I passed through the kitchen heading toward the front door. Holy shit. The feeling that I just absolutely fucked up filled my chest and dumped ice straight into my heart. It felt like the time I was facing an aggressive bull and the fence line was 100 meters away. My logical brain didn't know why I was fucked, but my instincts did. Because I'm lacking in the survival instincts, however, I kept walking through the kitchen in order to see who was there. The voices were now arguing with each other, and I somehow knew they were talking about me, the idiot that was walking toward them. I eventually got to the breakfast bar that divided the kitchen from the front door area. There, I could finally make my body stop walking and froze up. Hanging in front of the door were two grey glowing orbs. The voices were very loud and very angry now, but in a weird muffled screaming way. I knew it was loud, but my ears weren't picking it up. Within a second, both of them had stopped talking, twirled around each other several times, and then shot through the ceiling. I ended up sitting at the kitchen computer, staring at the black monitor, until I heard my mum and sister come through the door about 15 minutes later. I had a year-long experience of strange events that I've never been able to explain or have a full memory of. It started in winter up north on a project. Our crew was put up in a motel 10 minutes outside of the largest town in the area. I somehow got upgraded to a king-size bed with couches. It was a nice room. Our days were long, so I used the couches to stack my clothes in piles. I had brought my entire desktop with me and was in the middle of a massive argument with my ex over Facebook Messenger at 1 AM during the second week up there. At some point, I opened my eyes and I was sitting on top of a pile of hoodies on the couch. This time was now 4 AM. I rushed over to the computer. At some point after 1 AM, I had stopped typing a sentence midway through. My ex had left a ton of messages throughout the night demanding I answer her back. She also left missed calls and texts on my phone that was still sitting beside the mouse. I figured I had somehow passed out, but wasn't sure how I ended up on top of my hoodies on the couch and not just fall into bed. I went to sleep normally for the remaining couple of hours before work. A couple of days later, a stranger scenario happened. My routine was we'd finish work. I'd come back to the motel around 9 PM, shower and change, and drive into town for a late night dinner at Boston Pizza, the only restaurant open late other than McDonald's. So this particular night, I went through my routine, took a shower and changed, headed out the door. I got to my car, and when I turned it on, something felt really wrong. I looked at the time. It was now 2 AM. I had no idea how I lost 4 hours between showering and getting into my car. It felt weird. My whole body felt weird. I felt violated, like a rape victim would describe waking up from being assaulted while passed out. You feel violated, but you have no idea what happened. Not a single memory or explanation. I stayed up all night being scared shitless, trying to figure out what had happened. Why was I missing 4 hours, and if I had passed out, why didn't I wake up on the floor? Why did I feel violated? The rest of the project, nothing else happened. But once I got back home, things started happening that were just as weird. So I did more research, and I found out that the first town where this happened was and is a hotspot for UFO activity. Many have asked me if carbon monoxide was a factor. My landlord required it and still does. It gets inspected twice a year along with the smoke detectors. However, I don't know if any of the motels and hotels I stayed at had carbon monoxide detectors. For the first month or so, nothing happened further, but then something weird started happening. I began waking up at around 2 AM and not being able to fall back asleep until the sun came up. I would wake up and have a huge urge to turn on every light in the apartment and stay up, find things to do, and wait until the sun came up before going back to bed. I started to notice that in my dreams, random strangers would show up telling me to wake up. If I tried to ignore them in my dream, they would find ways to harass me and tell me to wake up, telling me it's really important that I wake up. Then there's a really vivid dream. I had gotten dressed up in my room and driven to an upscale hotel. I have no idea what the context of this dream was, by the way. When I got to my hotel room in the dream, someone started knocking on the door, shouting, "Hello, hello," over and over again. Just when I was about to open the door, the phone rang. I answered and the voice on the phone told me not to open the door. I kept telling whoever was on the phone that I really should see why this person keeps knocking, but the voice kept urging me not to answer the door. I finally hung up the phone, headed to the door and opened it, and woke up in bed in a cold sweat. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't go back to sleep. These were the kind of dreams, people trying to get me to wake up, and random flashes of bright white light that would light up everything no matter where I was or what time of day in my dream. I remember one dream being outside in the middle of a sunny day and a bright white flash that overpowered the sun. And usually at this point, some random person in my dream would run up to me and urge me to wake up, or tell me that the flash wasn't part of my dream and I should wake up, or tell me that the flash wasn't part of my dream and I should wake up. Random people in your dream telling you you're in a dream and that you have to wake up is creepy as fuck, and they were always strangers, no one I knew in real life. A precursor to these dreams was the urge to go to sleep early. I would have these urges to drop everything that I was doing and get in bed, sometimes leaving lights on, TV on, in the middle of games, middle of eating, etc. There was no fighting it. I would put down the controller or put my fork down and march right into my room and lie down. It was this weird zombie-like drowsiness, but I would always wake up after 2 a.m, not being able to go to sleep again until the sun came up. During that summer, I took a trip to upstate New York with a friend, and we stayed at some motel overnight before heading further on our trip. That night, I remember knocking on my door and someone who kept yelling, "Hello, hello," just like in that hotel dream. I remember my friend was fast asleep, unfazed by the knock, but I ended up going to the door and unlocking it. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up sitting on the office chair by the desk around 6 a.m. I checked, but the door was locked and nothing had been taken. It didn't look like anyone had entered. I woke up my friend and asked if he heard knocking during the night. He said no. I told him what happened and he was pretty pissed that I would wake up in the middle of the night to open the door to a stranger, but there was no sign that I did or that someone had come in, just that I somehow ended up on the chair and not the bed. I still feel like I was awake when I went to answer the door though. The weird thing was that these dreams and urges to go to sleep wouldn't always happen, maybe 2 to 3 times a week, but I was starting to fear going to sleep without the lights being on, all blinds closed, or I'd fight to stay up all night and just go to sleep during the day. After this, I was getting really fed up with how fucked my sleeping schedule had become, and I started to notice when I'd get the feeling that I should go to sleep, I would take that as a cue to get in my car and head for the busiest section of the city at night I could find, filled with people, and I'd notice that the urge to go to sleep would go away instantly. So every time I felt the urge to drop everything and go to sleep, I would fight the urge and drive downtown. Anytime I felt like I was being watched too, I'd get in my car and go downtown. It must have worked because after a few weeks of doing this, all these strange urges to go to sleep randomly, dreams with the flashes of white light and people telling me to wake up, all went away. I haven't had a single recurrence of these events since. However, I noticed I still have a fear of going to sleep until the sun comes up, that I'm always fighting. I also recently noticed that pictures of the typical grey alien now scare the shit out of me, and I hate looking at them. Even seeing the cartoon ones on South Park, I get mini panic attacks. Those pictures had never bothered me before in my life, but now they send me into waves of panic. I still have no explanation for the missing time up north, the weird dreams, or that one night at the motel in upstate New York, which I don't think was a dream. It felt very real and felt like another missing time event. Most people I've told don't know what to make of it. My current girlfriend has noticed I obsess with making sure all blinds are closed with no open slivers no matter where I sleep. I told this story to someone at a party once and the guy came out and told me his abduction story, and he was pretty positive that I had been getting abducted during that year and that they'd been getting bored of me, or I had become a hassle with constantly trying to dive to places full of people to avoid these happenings. Other friends either offered me no explanation or believed some sort of abduction scenario was taking place. Who knows? I have no memory of being physically abducted, but those weird feelings of being watched, being urged to go to sleep, feeling violated when waking up, that shit felt real and still bothers me. As an added bonus, last year I fell asleep in my girlfriend's bed while we stayed up watching Netflix in the living room. I left the lights on. At some point in the night, she came to turn off the lights and says I woke up screaming and yelling, "Fuck off, leave me alone, help, don't touch me," etc. She said it was the most terrifying moment of her life, but that literally seconds later, I had passed back out and was asleep again. She couldn't get me to wake up. So I was about 15. Every night, Jay and I would sneak out at about midnight and go back home around 4 to 5 in the morning before our parents would wake up for work. On one particular night, we had just snuck out and it was about 1 AM. We headed to my backyard, laid on the trampoline and stared at the stars and talked, like we always did. Now if you're in my room right now and you look around, you'll see the definite four corners when your ceiling and walls meet. You can see how square they turn. Edge of wall, sharp turn, second wall, same with your ceiling. You can see each individual flat surface. The sky did that. It went from staring at the stars to looking at a cube of sky. From the southeast corner of the sky came this giant UFO. I mean, huge. As if it took up a quarter of the entire sky. We both stared at it in dead silence. It didn't make any noise even as it moved. And while it spun, it was only hovering straight. The spinning didn't move like you imagine a frisbee doing. The sides just turned while it moved. I guess what it looked like doesn't matter, but Jay and I had our eyes dead set on it. We didn't say a word. We didn't point to show the other person. As it began coming towards us, we both flipped over. Again, no hints, no talking and no eye contact. In total sync. We flipped onto our stomachs and we stayed as flat and as quiet as we could. Now ducking from something sounds totally normal and instinct, but that's not what this was. It was literally almost like telepathy. I can remember us having a mental conversation of, stay flat and it won't see us. Don't move. We watch it make a weird angled C shape across the sky, and although it felt totally in slow motion, it could have been only a few minutes because I think both of us held our breath the entire time. Now for the weirdest part. As soon as I thought it was out of sight, boom, daybreak. We had literally just gotten to the yard and I know it was 1:15 AM because I checked. But the minute we felt released from laying flat, it was very bright, like 7:30 or 8 AM bright. I don't remember talking to him at all afterwards, other than making eye contact and then making a break for our homes before our parents noticed we weren't there. A few weeks, even months maybe, I'm talking to my brother's girlfriend about what happened. Apparently she's real into that shit, but also completely terrified. She said the fact that it felt like a few minutes but then it was suddenly 6 or 7 hours later truly 100% makes her think that we were abducted. She was serious. I made jokes about how I should go to hypnotherapy to unblock the memories and she deadpans and says don't. People who are abducted are traumatized by what happened to them. They even get PTSD. The next day she texted me about how she couldn't sleep. I think abduction is a little bit of a stretch and she watched too many Discovery Channel documentaries, but the weird loss of time irks me still. I do know what we saw was 100% real. Aliens? I don't know. Abduction? I don't know. I hate to say it, but I think whatever it was saw us. I was about 8 or 9 and my mum tells me that we are going on a day trip to meet her high school friend. Cool. I grabbed my Game Boy Advance because I know my mum's friend has kids my age and I wanted to show them one of the racing games I had. I overheard this from my mum talking with her friend at her house. They told me to leave the room because they needed to talk about adult things. Little, innocent, curious me wonders exactly what these adult things were that I couldn't hear. Were they going to throw some new juicy cuss words out? Well, my mum's friend had a little girl who would sleepwalk at night. It started when they moved into their new house in Northern California. It was a suburban area but not too suburban, Basically a new neighbourhood with a lot of empty homes and forest patches in between each community. She was about 4 years old and they found her one night in the backyard just sitting there. After that incident, they decided they need to lock her in a room at night and bar up her windows so that she didn't end up in the woods nearby or anywhere besides her room really. The story. Mum's friend and husband wake up to a loud boom on the side of the house in the middle of the next night. It felt like something hit the house because everything shook. They check on their boys. They're all good. They didn't hear anything back and go back to sleep. They check on their daughter, unlock the door and realise she isn't in her room. They start to freak out and then hear a knock at the door. They open it. It's the effing sleepwalking 4-year-old daughter. They ask her where she's been and she said with the men and points down the street. Pissed off, Dad sees 2 guys in coats walking down the street. He yells at them and starts sprinting after them. Mum's friend said coat guys didn't react at all. Coat guys turn the corner and Dad turns the corner and then they're gone. Mum and Dad check and lock the windows. No tampering. They notify the police who pretty much say there's nothing they can do but we'll keep an eye out. Effing sleepwalking 4-year-old daughter is fine. She isn't scared at all. She's just tired and goes back to bed. After that, my mum didn't understand why I was scared as hell at night. She believes that she was abducted but refuses to tell me what happened. Even my dad tells me that he can't tell me the story. He says it's for mum to share if she wants to share it. Which is fair enough. But overhearing this when I wasn't supposed to hear it had tripped me out as a kid. I was home alone in this little house I lived in the middle of nowhere. It was probably around 2 AM and I was just listening to some music, enjoying having the place to myself for a change, when all of a sudden my dogs start going crazy. Normally, when someone pulls in the driveway or comes up to the back door, they go to the door they heard the noise beyond and peek through the blinds to see who it is. But this night, they're running all around the house from door to door, barking louder than they ever do. When I stood up to go see what the hell they were on about, I noticed that the whole house seemed to be lit up with a deep blue light. Turning into the living room, it became obvious that it was emanating from each window. I put on my shoes to go outside and see who was out there, but by the time I could get there, the light had faded away. There was no sound of a car engine really, or really anything. There was no sound of a car engine or really anything, and where I lived, you could hear a car coming from a mile away. I felt a chill run down my spine, but it was the weirdest sense of fight or flight situation which neither option seemed viable, like I was frozen to the spot. I wanted to turn around and get back inside, and then I just was. Right back in the chair, and I was listening to music, as if I just blinked and there I was. The same song was playing and I still had my shoes on. My dogs were settled by this point and I had no idea anything happened, other than in my memories. About 20 years ago, I was walking home from the shops with my dad and we stopped to watch some really odd lights in the sky. There were 2 lights, slightly bigger than the stars zooming around and orbiting each other, making figure 8s, etc. And then they stopped moving, got bigger and bigger until the bright light filled the sky, and then they were gone. We carried on our journey home after that. We hadn't stopped for more than 5 minutes. The whole journey should have taken 20 minutes to get home. When we got home, Mum was freaking out. We had been gone for over 65 minutes. Our watches were both still working, but we were 45 minutes behind every clock in the house. She told us that she had neighbours and friends around looking for us. I don't know what happened to us or what we saw. Maybe nothing. I wouldn't say I was abducted, but I have an unexplained loss of time. I was around 10 years old, and I was riding around on my bike. It was time to go home for lunch, so I took a direct route through my town that would have taken about 10 minutes, but at the time, I had a couple bullies that prevented me from taking that path. So no biggie, there is another scenic route that takes about 40 minutes to go round. It was early afternoon in summer. I take the scenic route. I make it home almost like 7 hours later. The funny thing is, I never noticed anything weird until I got home, and it was starting to get a bit darker. I pedaled all the way and never took any detours. I live in a pretty secluded part of Washington state. I was in my late teens and my parents had gone to Seattle or something, so I was put in charge of the property. I was closing up everything like the barn we own and some other small utility buildings when I look up and see there's a reddish-orange light in a triangular formation. They were just floating there as if they were magnified stars. So magnified, in fact, that everything was slightly illuminated by their warm hue. I'm mesmerized, standing there, and suddenly lose my sense of balance, as if the ground in front of me had begun rising, and I pass out. The next thing I know, I'm on the ground in the barn I had locked up a half an hour before, according to my watch. Needless to say, I was petrified. I scurried to the house with my tail between my legs, scared and confused. I didn't sleep at all that night, and any sense of security I had was gone. Even though I was locked safely in my house, I felt hopelessly exposed. In hindsight, I think it's possible I was lightheaded, opened the barn door and fell down, but it still shakes me up thinking about it. I think this happened back to me in 2005. I was living out in the boonies with my mum, and I was about 15 years old. I'd been talking with this girl off and on for weeks, and I was on the phone with her. It was just before dark when this chick was telling me that I can come over to her house. She will sneak outside to hang with me as soon as her parents go to bed. Luckily, she only lived 2 miles away and I had a bike. Horny teenage me didn't take long to decide right then and there that I was going to make that trip. Luckily, my mum always went to bed super early as well. She texted me sometime after 10 PM and told me that her parents went to bed. It's on. I leave for a house. As I'm riding my bike down these dark country roads, I see 3 reddish-orange lights in a triangular formation. They were just hanging there still. I stopped for a second to get a better look because there were some trees obstructing my view, and they started looking bigger the more I looked at them. Then I started to feel this weird sensation that I can only describe as similar to vertigo. Then I completely black out. I wake up, and I'm still on the side of the road, but not where I was before. I got super confused and couldn't quite figure out where I was for a minute. I pull out my phone and look at the time. It's dead. My bike is nowhere to be found. I start heading down the road in what I thought was the direction I came, and suddenly I realize where I was. I was in the opposite direction of my house from where I started. Like, I was on the same road, just on the other end of it. I turn around and realize this and run home. I get home and plug in my phone. It's like 2 AM. I have a bunch of missed calls and texts from that chick asking where I'm at, and you can imagine I'm creeped out as fuck, so I go to bed and sleep like shit the rest of the night. The next day, I call that girl and I tell her what happened. She sounds skeptical. I ask her what time she called me the first time last night after I left. She called me at around 11, and it wouldn't go through. I left some time after 10. I know my phone was nearly at full battery because it was on the charger before I left the house. I do find my bike later that day in the same place I remember stopping. It was just laying there on the side of the road. I remember having really crazy dreams and a bad headache for a couple of weeks after this happened. You know, after the first couple of weeks I never really had dreams much anymore. I still don't. I'm not sure if it's related at all though. I can't say for sure if it was aliens or abduction or whatever, but I'll be honest. I'm not normally an anxious guy, but being outside alone at night has creeped me the fuck out ever since. Staring into the night sky gives me anxiety when I'm by myself now. Fuck everything about that night. I'm not sure if I want to know what happened. I constantly keep waking up in night sweats. This one dream I do remember well was I was driving down the road when I wrecked. I got out and a snake bit me in the arm. My whole body was paralyzed and I felt the venom radiating outward to the rest of my body. I couldn't move or talk or anything. People were looking at me from the woods just out of sight, just staring at me like buzzards circling and waiting for an animal to die. I woke up and my arm was asleep as I had been laying on it. When I was about 7, my parents and I briefly lived in an apartment in Chicago next to my dad's old house. For whatever reason, on this night, we all slept on the living room floor, me in between my parents. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up and was entranced by an orange glow out one of the windows. We were on the second floor. I wandered the 5 or 10 feet over to it and looked out to see what I believed to be the house next door completely gone and a spacecraft in its place over an empty lot. I remember just staring at it in disbelief, feeling as though I couldn't move an inch, and it must have felt like I was there for ages, and then BAM! I woke up back between my parents, so it was a dream. Or so you'd think, but then except immediately after waking up, I rolled over and puked my brains out. I wasn't sick and I didn't throw up unless there's a serious stomach virus going on, so it was for an undetermined reason. I won't sit here and claim I was actually abducted. As I got older, I started to rationalize that I was probably just scared shitless by the dream, but I always do kinda wonder. I'm not entirely sure if we were abducted, but my wife, who was a non-believer, and I both have missing time. We were making love in our bed, and we suddenly both came to and were totally in different places in the room. I'm not sure how much time had passed, but she looked at me and said, "What the fuck just happened?" I wasn't sure. Neither of us were scared, but we were both incredibly tired. We decided we would just go to bed and talk about it in the morning. I looked up instances of missing time and a lot of them said the same thing. When they came to, they were just very tired and knew something was totally weird, but just wanted to go to sleep. Just for reference, we had a carbon monoxide detector which was fully functional. It was an apartment, not a house, so it was routinely checked and up to code at all times. Just to clarify, this was the day that my wife and I got engaged. She said it was like she fell asleep during sex and she woke up, but she was already sitting up and I was standing at the door. She remembers that we both came into consciousness at the exact same time and were disoriented, but felt like everything was okay. She's hesitant to say aliens, abduction, or even something spiritual, but she's exclaimed, "Something happened." When I was in 7th grade, time would actually skip a lot for me. I would basically become aware of where I was and I'd be like walking to my class or something, but I wouldn't even know which class I was going to because I didn't know the time or date. It felt like I had blacked out for a couple of days each time I became, conscious. That ended up happening for like a month and I was very scared, and I ended up crying in the bathroom till one of my teachers found me. It hasn't happened since and stopped right after my parents took me to a psychiatrist. It's very strange though, because basically I remember all of my middle school experience pretty vividly except for the 7th grade. Some nights I dream of myself back in the 7th grade and having that feeling of being scared and not knowing the time or date, or basically what's going on in my life around me. Not my favourite dreams. I started losing time a few years ago. I would just kind of come to miles away from my house, not knowing where I'd been. It went hand in hand with this horrible feeling that I knew everyone on a personal level. Random people on the street I'd recognise, but I didn't know where from, but like really recognise them. I figured out sometimes when I really recognise someone on an almost personal level, that it would trigger a loss of time. I went to a psychiatrist and got diagnosed with schizophrenia. Of course, there were other symptoms, but I remember those two the most. They were the first sort of inkling I had that something was wrong. I'm on medication, but I still really feel those moments, although I'm too scared to tell the psychiatrist because, other than that feeling and loss of time, there's nothing else wrong with me. I was at a friend's cabin one night with 5 to 6 friends. It was late at night and we were all hypnotized for about 15 to 20 minutes, looking at these 3 dancing lights above the hill across the lake. Then a shooting star went across the sky and it lit everything up almost as bright as day. We all ran into the cabin. When looking back, I get a strange feeling of thinking how we don't have much memories to recollect after we went inside. Deciding to just fall asleep right away instead of talking about what we just saw. I can't say that I or any of my friends were abducted. After seeing those lights, I did a lot of research on UFOs and stuff for the next few years. I do find it strange that we all went to sleep quickly after we went inside and, however, there wasn't overwhelming evidence that we got abducted. I have no idea. All I know is that seeing those lights was an amazing experience. It really opened my eyes and mine to a much larger world than I saw before. My grandparents and one of their parents back in the 60s or 70s were fishing on the Georgian Bay in Canada while they were on this island when out of nowhere they saw this giant orange glowing ball around the size of a large 2-story house come from around a bend in the lake, and it went silently past them and was really close apparently. My grandpa said it looked like the inside of it was on fire, but it was just the surface moving around in a weird way. After it went past them, it stopped dead in its tracks and went back the same way it came, vanished around the bend of the lake. He looks concerned every time it's brought up and said it was the most terrifying feeling he's ever had. His dad was on the other side of the island and came scooting up the boat about 5 minutes later and told them they were leaving because he saw it too. Alright guys, I've got like hundreds more of these stories to give you, but I'm going to end this video on the last final story here I've got for you. I don't want to keep dragging on with more and more stories because I think it'll be too much to cram into the one video today, but I definitely have a lot more lined up, so if you guys want to see it, let me know in the comments below, and let's get on with the last story. So, full disclosure, I don't know if I was abducted. I don't honestly believe that I was abducted. I just know that if what I had was a nightmare, it was such a nightmare that I still remember it to this day in nearly full clarity. I was about 4 or 5 years old and my father was working night shift. My mother was watching football in our living room and I went to sleep on some chairs near the entertainment centre. I don't recall how or why, just that I conked out in that spot. I woke up, and I say it like that because I don't actually know if I was awake or dreaming some undetermined time later. The lights were still on, but the TV was off, and the house was unnaturally quiet, like the sound was getting sucked up. I looked at the TV first, then turned my head left, and saw my mother floating about a foot off the ground with her eyes glowing orange and her mouth hanging open. Naturally, I panicked. I didn't know where I was going or what I had planned to do, just that I had to get out of that room, so I bolted for the hallways that led for the bedrooms and found myself unable to move. Something walked out of my bedroom in the back. It couldn't have been much bigger than me as a child, but I remember it was brown and leathery looking with arms that were too long for a human. The eyes were red and flashed like bike reflectors. I didn't even know what ET was, much less seen the movie at this point in my life, for the record, but needless to say, after this being burned into my memory, I didn't find the movie endearing. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream even though I was trying. All I could do was stand there while this thing hesitated at the end of the hallway. Then it screamed like a bird with something stuck in its throat and kind of waddled but ran straight for me. I woke up on the stairs again screaming and crying until I couldn't anymore from exhaustion. My mother didn't or doesn't remember any of it. After that, I was pretty well spooked by any feasible account of any alien abduction or UFOs in general. Then I got several episodes of feeling like I was getting jerked leg first out of my bed all the way into my teenage years. Thankfully, nothing like what I remembered from before though. Alright guys, that was the final story. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling officially creeped out right now. There were a lot of stories there, a lot of creepy things, and these people are adamant that this happened to them. Now, as I told you at the beginning of the video, I feel particularly fascinated by this subject. I watch channels like Secure Team 10. Sorry, I'm stuttering because, I'm worked up. There was so many stories in there tonight. I actually had to take a few breaks in between the stories just to, regain myself and be able to continue narrating. So, look, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you think they're true. Let me know how you feel after hearing those stories. If you believe in aliens, if you've ever had an encounter, let me know your stories. As I said, I've got a lot more, but if you as a viewer or a subscriber are interested in this and have a story you'd like to share, I'm more than happy to to narrate it or put it in the next video if you want, or even just discuss it in the comments below. I think it's a very fascinating thing, and people out there have these real life experiences. I personally haven't, but I'm easily creeped out by this sort of stuff. So yeah, let me know what you think guys, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Have a good night.